When we talk about criminal fires, culpability usually lies with the perpetrator. Their intent and their actions place the blame squarely at their own feet. But when an accidental fire exposes cracks in the very systems meant to save lives, the questions get a lot murkier. Where do the fingers point then? Is it the owner's fault for not knowing better? Is it the enforcing authority's fault for not demanding better? And what about when the choices of the victims themselves seem irrational, even illogical? Do those decisions shift the balance of blame? These aren't new questions. They've haunted every industrialized nation for as long as there have been factories, shops, and high-rises. Negligence doesn't occur in a single lapse. It's layered. And while we tend to picture groupthink as something that drives mobs into chaos, polite, civilized groupthink can be just as deadly. Turns out, let's not make a fuss isn't much of a survival strategy. This week we're talking about a fire that claimed dozens of lives in Christchurch, New Zealand in the 1940s. A fire that followed a blueprint the world already knew, because 3 decades earlier in New York City, Americans had learned the very same brutal lessons. The problem is fire safety knowledge doesn't seem to travel well. It's water permeable, it dissolves before it crosses oceans, and sometimes it gets turned back at land borders. Apparently, fire doesn't respect passports, but fire codes seem to. Each country seems determined to make the same mistakes and learn the same lessons the hard way. And those lessons, we're still learning them. The Ballantynes fire isn't just about negligent owners or flawed architecture. It's about regulators who failed to enforce safety and a fire brigade that stumbled at the very moment they were needed most. It's about a government forced to admit that some of the fingers it pointed ended up aimed right back at their own chest, which makes for a pretty awkward game of pin the blame on the donkey. This is the story of the Ballantynes fire of 1947, but it's also the echo of New York's Triangle Shirtwaist Fire of 1911. It's the prelude to the Zhu Toy Factory Fire of 1993 in Shenzhen, China, and the Tazreen Garment Factory Fire of 2012 in Dhaka, Bangladesh. Because if there's one truth about humans, it's this. We're terrible at learning from someone else's trauma. We only seem to change when the tragedy is our own. And if that sounds like insanity, repeating the same blueprint of disaster across decades and continents, what's even more insane is how much power we surrender to authority, even in life or death moments. At Ballantynes, the people literally stood in a burning building, breathing toxic smoke as the walls closed in, and waited for permission to save themselves. This is Permission to Burn, the Ballantynes fire of Christchurch, New Zealand, right now on Crime to Burn. Welcome to Crime to Burn, where we explore the dark, sooty landscape where true crime intersects with arson and criminal negligence. Join us as we sift through the ashes to bring you the story of what really happened. Welcome back to Crime to Burn. I'm April, a fire protection engineer, former firefighter, and the girl who starts sweating in any public place with only one visible exit.
And I'd much rather be playing VR golf.
We're so excited you've tuned in today. Otherwise, we're just talking to ourselves, and while that is not completely unusual, at least for me, it does make the time and effort we put into producing this show feel a little pointless. You can help us grow our points like a strapping buck by sharing this podcast with your friends, family, and social media circle. Follow us on TikTok, Facebook, X, YouTube, or Instagram for a mix of fire science lessons that might actually save a life, or unhinged content that might make someone shoot coffee out their nose. Honestly, it depends on the day, the mood, and possibly the phase of the moon. We're there trying to attract a wider audience, and since we're not yet doing something super dramatic like lighting our farts on fire to go viral, we humbly ask for the next best thing: your likes, comments, favorites, and shares. Growing a podcast is hard work, and lighting farts is dangerous. Help us avoid rectal fire injuries.
You need like a special butt plug.
Likewise, whatever app you're using to listen right now has options for ratings and reviews. The lion's share, about 80% of our listeners, are on Podbean, which makes Podbean our favorite. But Spotify and Apple Podcasts barely know we exist, despite over 100 5-star reviews between the two of them. If each of you picked just one other app to leave a 5-star rating or quick written review, you would be giving us a tremendous leg up that we desperately need. If you love our show but hate ads, our benevolent cult leader Steve has a seat waiting for you at the sacred snack table. Just head over to our Patreon, the link is in the show notes, and boom, you're in. Joining a cult has never been so easy. Plus, you'll get extra bonus content, and this is your last chance to join before the biannual sticker drop next month. Right now, it's going to be a huge exclusive event for Rachel, but if you want to share in her cult bounty, sign up before September 30th to get your exclusive Cult of Steve stickers. And if you're not really into that kind of commitment, no worries. Crime to Burn will always be free, ads and all, on your favorite podcast platforms, but you can still help support us by wearing our logo in soft, breathable cotton. Head over to our spread shop, also linked in the show notes, and treat yourself to some gear. Finally, send us your case suggestions, fire stories, feedback, and viral video recommendations to crimetoburn@gmail.com. And before we dive into today's story, I have to share this with you. In our last series on the Bath School Massacre, I kicked things off by talking about 2 different books I'd read, and I admitted I liked one of them just a little more than the other, and then immediately felt like I'd set myself on fire from the inside out when the other author so kindly and graciously reached out. Not only was he complimentary about our coverage, but plot twist, he's agreed to come on the podcast and talk about his personal experience researching the Bath case. I don't have a date yet, but I'll keep you updated as soon as we nail that down. So, if you're still considering a deeper dive into the Bath case and you're choosing between the 2 books I mentioned, well, Arnie Bernstein just sprinted into first place for being such an awesome human being. And speaking of shame and hindsight, that brings us right to today's case, because if there's one thing the Ballantynes fire teaches us, it's how deadly it can be when lessons come too late. And a huge thank you to Sarah Evans for suggesting this case. I had told her I didn't know when we'd get to it, but the Foya fairy godmother waved her magic wand and poof, my court records for another case didn't show up in time. So I had to pivot to something I could cover without paperwork, and surprise, Sarah, your case came up way sooner than we expected. Now before we dig in, full disclosure, I'm American. My knowledge of New Zealand is what I've been able to research and read, and I've worked hard to get all the details right, but if you're listening from New Zealand and here's something I've gotten wrong, pronunciation, history, geography, anything, my inbox is open, crimetoburn@gmail.com. Just please correct me gently because I will spiral and overthink my entire life over one mispronounced word. In 1907, New Zealand became a dominion, which meant it could run its own parliament and internal affairs, though the country still leaned heavily on Britain. And by 1947, King George VI was on the throne and his daughter, the future Queen Elizabeth, was preparing to marry Prince Philip. The royal wedding was the headline event, dominating the papers and the chatter. But those celebrations were about to be overshadowed by something much darker, because just days before the nuptials, Christchurch would suffer a fire so devastating that it remains even now the deadliest blaze in New Zealand history. So while London was busy perfecting its fairy tale wedding, Christchurch was about to be written into history for a very different reason, one measured not in flowers and pageantry, but in smoke and loss. As I understand it, Ballantynes wasn't just a store, it was an experience. You didn't just stop by to grab socks on your way home. You dressed up, you lingered in the tea rooms, you got your hair done in the salon, you browsed furniture, had your clothes custom tailored. It was less of an errand and more of an outing. Honestly, it was the kind of place where people went to see and be seen. Basically Instagram before Instagram, except your filter options were hats or hair salon. The building was sprawling, a retail empire that swallowed up neighboring structures until it stretched across nearly an entire city block. Over the years, additions and renovations stitched together a patchwork of architecture that looked polished on the surface but functioned like a labyrinth. A maze dressed up with fine finishes, carefully designed to separate customers from their hard-earned money, and tragically, a maze that offered few clear paths out when disaster struck. You see, Ballantynes wasn't just a store or a tea room or a salon or a tailor. It was all of those things stacked together, with a factory perched on top of a podium of showrooms, knitted out of a patchwork of buildings. On the surface, it looked seamless, but in truth, it was a Frankenstein's monster of a store, if Dr. Frankenstein had been a Beverly Hills plastic surgeon stitching elegance over chaos. On the upper floors, women worked long hours sewing dresses and sketching hat designs, while corporate offices handled the endless paperwork of business, audits, ledgers, typewriters clattering. Secretaries and seamstresses kept the machine profitable. Just below them, though, shoppers lingered over tea, had their hair styled, browsed polished furniture showrooms. It was a strange duality, a factory floor stacked directly above a luxury playground. And before we go further, a quick international architecture lesson. In the US, we call the ground floor the first floor. But in New Zealand, like most of the rest of the world, the ground floor is just that, the ground floor. It doesn't get its own number. The first floor is one level up. So when I say Ballantynes had 2 floors, that means 2 floors above the ground floor. In some sections, there were actually 3 floors above the ground floor. So it was in some places a 3-story and in other places a 4-story building, in US terms. Basically, Americans decided the ground floor deserved a participation trophy in the form of a number. It's confusing, but I wanted to get that straight for our US listeners up front. Parts of the building also had a basement, which for once doesn't get a number whether you're in the US or anywhere else. But because Ballantynes had been stitched together from multiple storefronts, it wasn't one large common basement. Instead, it was carved up into sections, and you couldn't access every area from a single basement entrance. A bit like a subterranean quilt, only with stockrooms and storage instead of cozy fabric squares. And the basement is where everything went wrong. Those chopped up, disconnected spaces beneath the store would play a critical role in what happened next, not just in how the fire spread, but in how people above lost their chance to get out. Up until the afternoon tea break, it was by all accounts a normal day at Ballantynes. Picture it. Women in gloves and hats, sipping tea, men in suits and ties, checking ledgers, not a single yoga pant or pair of sneakers in sight. The air hung hazy with cigarette smoke because yes, people smoked everywhere. And in a building stacked with dresses, paper records, and wood-paneled walls, you'd think that would set off alarm bells. But there were no alarms. In 1947, that was just normal. Breaks were strictly scheduled, and mid-afternoon, everyone in the offices and factory rooms paused to socialize and grab a snack. What no one knew was that this tea break would be the last moment of normalcy before everything went wrong. The afternoon tea break had just ended. Secretaries slid back behind typewriters, seamstresses bent over fabric, and ledgers were pulled back across polished desks.
Who's been those seamstresses over? I think that's a fair question.
I said they slid back behind typewriter. Oh no.
That's what the secretaries did. I was with you. Come on.
The hum of normalcy returned to Ballantynes. Shoes clicking on wood floors, the quiet clatter of salesgirls in the tea room, the faint scratch of pens against paper. And then in the basement, that rhythm cracked. An employee spotted it first, smoke curling in a place where no smoke belonged, a faint glow in the shadows where stock was kept. It wasn't dramatic at first. Just the kind of thing you'd almost convinced yourself you may have imagined. But in a building stitched together like a patchwork quilt, that little thread of fire was about to unravel everything. After that first wisp of smoke was seen in the basement, things unfolded with a maddening mix of frustrating slowness and terrifying speed. The employee who spotted it didn't sound an alarm because there wasn't one. Ballantynes had no fire alarm system at all, no bells to ring, no pull stations, no automatic call to a fire brigade. The procedure was simple: tell management. So word crept upstairs like a clerk carrying an invoice, not a life or death warning. Instead of an immediate evacuation, the news inched its way up the chain of command while the fire down below gathered strength. Smoke and toxic gases snaked unseen through wall cavities, stairwells, and unsealed chases, racing the corporate hierarchy for who could reach the upper floors first. Minutes slipped away while managers debated and clerks waited for direction. Staff who re-entered the basement found not just smoke but flames, and now wisps of haze were curling onto the sales floor above. Customers kept shopping. Employees straightened displays and whispered to one another, waiting for the official word on what to do. Even as the haze thickened and nerves rose, they kept their practiced calm, because that was the instruction. Stay on the floor, don't panic. The employee who first spotted the fire gave the order, call the fire brigade. But instead of dialing directly, the message was routed through Ballantynes' internal switchboard. The operator was told to notify the fire brigade and the company directors. And that's where precious minutes slipped away. It is believed that she tried to reach one of the Ballantynes first, the owners, working in the upstairs offices before placing that emergency call. By the time the alarm finally reached the fire station, it was 3:46 p.m., 11 minutes after the smoke was first seen. In a fire, those 11 minutes might as well have been an eternity. By now, the smoke was impossible to ignore on the lower levels. Shoppers began worriedly drifting toward the exits. But upstairs in the tea room, where an event featuring Miss New Zealand herself was scheduled, staff reassured anxious guests that it was nothing serious, just a small basement fire, they said. The brigade had been called, everything was under control. Meanwhile, on the upper floors in the dressmaking and credit departments, employees carried on blissfully unaware. Typewriters clicked, sewing machines whirred, Downstairs, though, the mood was shifting. Concern hardened into realization. This was no minor blaze. Yet sales clerks stood their posts, eyes watering, lungs stinging, waiting for the word from management. Waiting for permission to do the one thing that might save their lives. Leave.
What happens if they don't wait for... they get beaten, or what's happening here where they're so indoctrinated to not leave?
So in the documentaries I watched, they were super strict about being on time, only taking exactly the length of your breaks, not leaving unless you were on a scheduled break.
Letting your body be consumed by fire so that...
That wasn't an official policy, but that was the result, yeah.
Well, that's commitment to a department store.
Yeah.
More than I would have. I would not be that... Don't hire me for department store work if you expect me to burn to death for any reason.
Meanwhile, out on the street, passers-by began to notice smoke curling from the basement windows. To anyone looking in from the outside, it was clear that something was seriously underway. But upstairs, behind polished doors of showrooms and offices, men and women kept working as if nothing were wrong. Typewriters clacked, sewing machines hummed, ledgers filled with tiny numbers, all while smoke threaded its way unseen through ducts, shafts, and stairwells, buying just a few more minutes of normalcy before everything began to unravel. As the first engines rattled onto Colombo Street, Senior Station Officer Stevenson and his crew were met in the alleyway by Roger Ballantyne himself, one of the store's directors. Ballantyne pointed toward the basement entrance, explaining it was probably just a cable that had fused, maybe something that could be handled with an extinguisher. Stevenson and his men hauled a charged hose down the right-of-way, expecting to find the fire quickly. But the smoke was so thick they couldn't see the stairwell entrance just a few feet away. They crawled, groped, and retreated, coming back again and again without ever managing to get water onto the actual seat of the fire. And while the basement smoldered unchecked, no one asked the question that should have been obvious. Has the building been evacuated? Roger Ballantyne didn't raise it, and the fire officers didn't press it. Their focus stayed locked on the cellar. Inside, the commotion of sirens and the heavy rumble of fire engines pulling up outside finally pierced the walls of Ballantynes. Office workers on the upper floors glanced at each other, uneasy. Managers slipped out of rooms, not to evacuate, but to hunt down upper management for direction. No one dared to act on their own. In the credit office, the message was implicit. Leaving financial records unattended was tantamount to handing in your resignation. Losing your job in Christchurch in 1947 was a fate many feared more than the smoke in the air. So they stayed. Downstairs, 10 crucial minutes ticked away while firefighters wrestled with smoke and confusion in the alley, trying to find a way into the basement. On the sales floors, the atmosphere grew unbreathable. Customers filed out, covering their mouths and squinting through the haze. Clerks scurried around to secure merchandise, cash drawers, ledgers, bolts of fabric, only to be forced out themselves as the smoke was thickening. But upstairs, the danger was deceptive. The smoke only whispered its way through cracks in the floorboards and seeped from concealed shafts. It was irritating but not overwhelming, and that slowness bred false confidence. Employees shifted nervously, watching managers for instruction, waiting for the all-clear that never came. Each passing minute tied them tighter to the building. As the minutes dragged on with no official word, a few managers finally broke ranks and made the difficult decision to evacuate their own departments. For those who stayed, the silence felt safer than defiance. It was a fatal miscalculation. They didn't realize that the exits they were waiting to use were already being swallowed by smoke and fire. The handful of executives who did try to give a building-wide evacuation order found themselves cut off almost immediately. Stairwells and fire escapes were already clogged with choking smoke, flames licking at doorways. The labyrinthine layout of Ballantynes, a patchwork of stitched-together buildings and narrow corridors, turned into a trap. Messages couldn't travel fast enough, and neither could the people carrying them. While some departments were ushered out in time, others sat waiting for permission that would never arrive, trapped behind walls that were quickly becoming unsurvivable. What they couldn't know was that some of the very people with the authority to order a full evacuation were trying to. They left their offices determined to spread the word, but they found themselves blocked at every turn. Stairwells were flooded with smoke, and fire escapes were impassable. Corridors twisted into dead ends by the building's Frankenstein design. The orders to evacuate were made, but the building itself silenced them. Departments that had been waiting faithfully for permission never received it. They remained at their desks as the fire closed in, obedience and loyalty squelching their sense of self-preservation, their common sense, and their chances of escape. Finally, in the credit office, the team realized the situation was spiraling out of control. That's when Ballantyne himself appeared. But instead of ordering the full evacuation, his first command was clear. Lock the records into the safe room, protect the ledgers, and then protect yourselves. Even as he knew that escape routes were already being cut off, his order prioritized paper over people, an instruction that sealed the fate of all those who obeyed. As Ballantyne left the credit department, convinced he'd secured the ledgers and given his people their marching orders, he rushed to reach another wing of the building to evacuate any staff remaining there. But by then, the fire had already overtaken key passageways. He found himself face to face with walls of smoke and flame, struggling desperately to push forward, but unable to reach the very employees that were still waiting on his word. His authority, the thing they'd trusted above their own instincts, couldn't cut through the fire. As the credit employees finally fled, having locked away their documents behind secure doors of the safe room, the building seemed to betray them. Smoke and heat, trapped in walls and ceilings, built up pressure until it burst outward in a sudden exhalation. Flames racing ahead of the fleeing workers. In the chaos, 3 women found themselves cut off, their only hope a desperate leap from a second-floor window onto a veranda roof above the ground-floor sidewalk. It was a 2-story drop. 2 survived the fall, though badly injured. The 3rd never got back up. Ballantyne himself was now trapped. Dozens of workers who had delayed their escape were overtaken by the fire, choked out by smoke, or cut off by stairways and corridors that had become funnels of flame. Ballantyne managed to reach a second-floor window where firefighters spotted him framed against the thick black smoke. For a moment, there was hope. He was visible, reachable, but the fire inside was moving faster than the ladders outside. The fire department ladders couldn't reach the upper floors, blocked by the wide veranda that wrapped around the building's street front. The veranda's pitched roof with its peak in the middle sloping down towards both the building and the street left firefighters scrambling for alternatives. As Ballantyne stood framed in the smoke-choked window, hoses blasted streams of water past him, and rescuers clambered onto the slick veranda with ladders, desperate to bridge the gap. A crowd below watched in horror as the first ladder they hoisted fell short. Gasps rippled through the street, and a second ladder was finally hauled up, long enough to reach him, and Ballantyne was pulled to safety. But the woman in his arms that he had tried to save alongside himself lost consciousness, fell, and never made it out of the building despite his heroic efforts to save her. She perished in the flames. As firefighters fought to gain control of the blaze, new challenges piled up. When the first call had gone out, a ladder truck was initially dispatched. But once the report was logged as a basement fire, the commanding officer canceled it. After all, why would ladders be needed below ground? That single decision would prove disastrous. Communication compounded the problem. In 1947, there was no unified radio network to link fire brigades across the region. Phone lines in Christchurch quickly jammed as word of the fire spread. Crews on the scene had to peel men away from the fight just to run to street-side phone boxes and try to call for reinforcements. More than once, those firefighters found themselves trapped in a grim waiting game, joining the public on overloaded switchboard lines, struggling to reach an operator who could finally connect them to other departments. Every wasted minute meant the fire gained more ground. As reinforcements from neighboring departments trickled in, they rolled into a scene that was already chaos. Fire engines battled through swelling crowds of onlookers who clogged the streets, desperate to see what was unfolding. And inside the fire brigade itself, leadership was conspicuously absent. Both of Christchurch's most senior fire officers happened to be off duty that day. That left command in the hands of men with far less experience, and it showed. Instead of a single, coordinated strategy, companies worked piecemeal. Each crew attacked the fire in their own way. Hoses snaking into different doorways and windows, water flying in uncoordinated arcs. There was no hierarchy, no unified plan, just a frenzy of effort that looked determined from the street but was fatally disorganized within. The blaze had already won precious minutes, and now thanks to the chaos, it was keeping the upper hand. The crowds only swelled as the fire roared higher. People pressed forward, desperate for a better view, until firefighters were forced to stop shouting and start acting. With the building groaning under the heat and collapse a real threat, they were forced to open their hoses not on the flames, but on the bystanders to push them back. Sheets of water shoved people backwards, pushing the front ranks out of the danger zone.
That's an interesting choice.
Wait to hear the next interesting choice.
I wonder if they trained for that.
But the onlookers weren't easily discouraged. Many simply scrambled up to the roofs of neighboring buildings for better vantage point. Soon there were so many crammed shoulder to shoulder on one of the roofs that firefighters feared the weight of the gawkers would cause it to give way. Once again, the hoses swung skyward, pelting the spectators until they scattered. It was an almost surreal image, firefighters fighting not just the fire, but the crowds watching it burn.
This is what happens when riot cops become firefighters.
Apparently. When it was all over, the flames had claimed 41 lives. The aftermath was grim. Firefighters and police shifted from rescue attempts to the heartbreaking work of recovery, combing through the wreckage of Ballantynes' elegant facade turned to charred ruin. What had been tea rooms and showrooms and offices just hours earlier was now a smoldering tomb. The coroner soon delivered a devastating announcement. Individual identification of the victims would not be possible. The fire had simply erased too much. Families who had gathered outside clinging to hope of at least burying their loved ones were told there would be no chance to claim a body, no final goodbye. Their loved ones' identities had been swallowed by the flames, and their remains were rendered indiscernible. Instead, all 41 victims would be laid to rest together in a single mass grave in Christchurch, a monument rising above to mark the lives lost, collectively remembered but never individually memorialized. With the victims laid to rest, the mourning gave way to fury. 41 graves now stood as silent accusations demanding answers. Who bore responsibility for this disaster? Who had failed so profoundly that dozens of people never made it home? Where did the collective outrage belong? With the owners, the regulators, or the very systems meant to protect the public? A royal commission of inquiry was convened to dig into those very questions. Its findings would lay bare not just the negligence of Ballantynes management, but also the cracks in New Zealand's fire safety regulations, the failures of the city authorities to enforce even the standards that did already exist, and the alarming missteps of the Christchurch Fire Brigade itself. What emerged wasn't just the story of a tragic fire, it was an indictment of an entire system. The findings were scathing. Responsibility for the 41 deaths was pinned on government regulators, Ballantynes management, and even, yes, the firefighters who responded. But one question everyone wanted answered, how did the fire start, remained frustratingly out of reach. The inquiry concluded that there simply wasn't enough evidence to know for sure. Two theories emerged. The first, a carelessly discarded cigarette smoldering to life in the basement. The second, a fault in the store's aging electrical system. Neither could be proven, so the official cause remains uncertain to this day. Instead of pinpointing a single cause, the inquiry turned its focus to why the fire was so deadly, and they found 8 major factors behind the staggering death toll. First was the building itself, sprawling and stitched together out of multiple structures with wide open fire areas and unprotected vertical shafts that acted like chimneys. The layout was so confusing that many of the employees didn't even know where alternative exits were. And while parts of the building had fire escapes, they quickly became impassable as flames and smoke choked them off. Exiting capacity was inadequate for the number of people inside the building. Second was the fuel load. Racks of clothing, paper records, wood finishes, and untreated fiberboard lining the walls. It was a tinderbox. Worse, many of those finishes weren't even compliant with the codes of the day. Then there was the delay in calling the fire brigade. 11 wasted minutes from the first wisp of smoke to the actual alarm. In a fire, that's a lifetime. There was the absence of any protective systems. There was no sprinkler systems, no automatic fire alarms, no automatic fire doors, and no standpipes with hoses. Even a basic alarm system tied directly to the fire brigade could have saved precious minutes. And sprinkler systems did exist at this time, but they weren't compulsory. The late attack on the fire. When the fire brigade did arrive, they failed to hit the seat of the blaze within the first 10 minutes, giving it the chance to flash over and explode upward. And then there's the culture of hierarchy. Employees and even managers waited for permission to act instead of evacuating as soon as the conditions turned deadly. There was no evacuation plan. Fire extinguishers were on some of the walls, but the staff had never even been trained to use them. The fire brigade's poor leadership, lack of coordination, and critical equipment blunders, including the canceling of the one ladder truck because they thought a basement fire didn't need one, were also cited as contributing factors. And perhaps most infuriating, administrative negligence. The city bylaws ignored or overridden, dangerous materials rubber-stamped, and enforcement agencies asleep at the wheel. Even where laws had existed, they were vague, inconsistently applied, and nearly impossible to enforce. Taken together, these weren't just mistakes, they were a web of systemic failures. Any one of them alone might not have been enough to kill 41 people, but woven together, they became a trap no one could escape. A web of negligence that cost lives and would scar a community forever. And the thing is, they should have known better. Most of these failures identified in Christchurch weren't new. They were the very same issues that had fueled the Triangle Shirtwaist Factory fire in New York City back in 1911. Inadequate exits, employer policies that valued business over human life, no alarms, no sprinklers, flammable building finishes, and employees left untrained for emergencies. The Triangle Fire became a massive catalyst for reform in the United States. It reshaped fire protection and life safety laws, and it fueled changes to labor laws that gave workers new protections. And yet, just over 3 decades later, Christchurch had to learn those same lessons the hard way. The echoes of Triangle could be heard in every recommendation that came out of Ballantynes' inquiry. The Triangle Fire didn't just shock New York, it shocked the nation. It led to sweeping reforms, mandatory fire drills, outward swinging exit doors, limits on how many people could be packed into a workroom, requirements for sprinklers in high-rise factories, stricter building codes, and stronger labor protections. For the first time, regulators started treating fire safety as a matter of life and death instead of an afterthought. And 3 decades later, when Christchurch endured its own version of that nightmare, the pattern repeated. The Ballantynes fire sparked outrage that forced lawmakers and regulators to act. New Zealand tightened building codes, expanded fire safety bylaws, and introduced mandatory evacuation drills and fire safety training. Just like in New York, it took tragedy to reveal what should have been obvious all along. But the lessons are always hard-won, and harder still to hold on to, because Ballantynes wasn't the last fire of its kind. Decades later, factories in China, Bangladesh, and beyond repeated the same story. Locked exits, flammable interiors, no training, no alarms. Each time the blueprint for disaster looked hauntingly familiar, and each time lives were lost before the reforms caught up. Ballantynes wasn't the last fire of its kind, and that's what makes it so chilling. That blueprint continues to show up again and again in different countries under different flags, and always the same pattern. Profits protected, people sacrificed. And every time, reform only came after the bodies were counted. Which leaves us with a deeper question, one that lingers long after the smoke clears. Who really has authority over your life, and why do we hand it over so easily? We're trained from childhood to obey, to wait for permission, to respect authority, and sometimes that authority might be necessary. But what happens when the authority you obey serves only money? Because money itself isn't evil, but the love of money, putting profit above people, can be deadly. We've seen it over and over again. Locked doors in New York, employees in Christchurch told not to leave without permission while smoke fills the store. And here's the paradox. Obedience is not loyalty. Fear is not loyalty. And if your system leaves workers too afraid to leave a burning building without permission, what does that say about the culture you've built? Do they need permission for everything to wipe their own asses? Self-preservation should be common sense. But here it was trained out of them. Programmed obedience can be deadly. And that's the haunting part. These fires happened decades, even continents apart, but the same pattern repeats. Authority and profit over human lives. So have we woken up yet, or are we still waiting for permission? We remember the victims of Ballantynes, of Triangle, of Julie, of Tazareen. Their lives were stolen not by fate, but by choices. Choices to put the profits over the people, obedience over survival. We don't get to pretend we don't know better anymore because we do know better. The only question is, do we care enough to act, or are we still waiting for permission? That feels better.
Don't get too close to me.
I'll get as close to you as I want to. Yeah, I married you.
Oh,
You're legally obligated.
What horrible tales of human tragedy have you come to regale me with today? I don't think hobbits are very funny. They're very serious creatures. You don't want to look a hobbit right in the eye.
Why?
Get your knees dirty? I don't know. I have the fear. Seems like a healthy fear. I was working on my fitness earlier.
Yeah, what'd you do?
I was fitting this meatloaf sandwich in my mouth.
Plateaus can be demotivating. Unless you're climbing a mountain, then a plateau is an ice break. I feel like this metaphor went off the rails.
Definitely need a rope. I'm not much of a whittler.
But I never claimed to make sense.
Actually, you do claim every week to make sense. Every week you put it out there to the public. Hey, we make sense. Or at least you do.
Maybe I should be drinking. I don't know if it's going to make me feel better or tired.
Probably yes.
Need like a Geritol or something.
I'm eyeballing your arm with envy.
I can get you an arm. Well, it's not the cooties, it's just that I need elbow room.
It's the cooties.
And those less...
Those Les Paul guitars are fantastic.
You could be a benevolent leader.
Don't start a group chat.
Well, if you guys hear thunder in the background, that's not our fault. You're going to take that up with a higher authority.
And I like turtles. And I'm going to get sweaty if we sit here without the fans for 2 hours. And these sounds are going into my ears against my will.
April, a fire protection engineer, former firefighter. Wait.
And long pause haver. I feel like my face is pressurized.
You ready?
Yeah.
Okay.
Go ahead, man. Finger my ear holes with your awful, tainted humanity stories. I'll turn off the inside thoughts. You trying to look at my concealed shaft?
That sounded like a cat Scrabble on the stairs.
The cats can play Scrabble. And this episode's brought to you by blind obedience. Go ahead and die for your masters. Don't ask questions. Don't think. Just act like a houseplant. Independent thought is for people who are continually stuck on one rung of the corporate ladder. I support macing people whenever possible. I mean, appropriate.
You talking about mace the spray or mace the, battle weapon?
We can leave that ambiguous. Don't inappropriately mace people, unless it's funny. I once maced a whole house on accident. Someone invited me over to their real fancy house to sing for my supper. Someone had a keychain sitting on a coffee table and it had a little pepper spray vial on it, little pepper spray thing. I'd never really seen one, so I was messing with it. I was like, oh, this is cool. Oh, I see how this works. You just, oh, okay, so you twist the thing and then you just, psst. But I depressed I didn't tell anybody. People in the kitchen cooking, it's a big house, a fancy place. And people started sniffling and rubbing their eyes and I could just see people starting to fall out from the effects of the spicy air.
Oh, no.
It cleared the whole room. I didn't let much out either.
They never found out that you were the culprit.
I admitted it. I don't suck the heads off the crawfish either, though.
It's hard to measure your own finger.
Now it's math and the metric system. I measure things in cheeseburger lengths. Do they have a 13th floor thing? Is that still a thing where they don't have a 13th floor?
Some buildings don't, some of the older buildings, but when I worked in Northern Virginia, our building had a 13th floor, so we were moving out of, I think it was the 11th floor in one building and moving to the 13th floor of another building. And we were joking about whether or not there would be a 13th elevator button or if it was good luck. And so as we're walking in together on that first day that all of our stuff had been moved over the weekend and we had crates in each office of all of our stuff. And people were like, oh, it's not bad luck to be on the 13th floor. We walked in and outside the building had these diagonal parts on the corners as it went up. And there was these railings there, and there was a line of vultures sitting on the railing. I was like, well, maybe the 13th floor isn't bad luck, but is a line of vultures watching us bad luck?
As long as you're alive, you should be all right.
Sitting on the side of the building.
If you're dead, you should worry about a vulture. That's a problem for you. One time I rescued a buzzard.
I remember you told me this.
They are stinkier than you might imagine. My car smelled like buzzard for a week.
Should have put some baking soda or something in there.
Well, I wasn't trying to cook the buzzard. That's bigger than a Texas titty twister.
Instead of pushing Imelda into the coast, it's actually sucking it away from the coast. So now they're saying that it's not actually going to make landfall.
That's not what I would do. If I was a hurricane, I'd definitely bend Imelda over the coast. And if you were waiting for permission, you can go now.
Crime to Burn is a production of Crime to Burn, LLC, where we light fires in your brain and not your buildings. All rights reserved. Still spiritually parched after this episode? It's okay, Steve believes in cross-pollination. Here's a trailer for a show we think deserves to infiltrate your ear holes, in a good way. Don't forget to leave a 5-star review before you go. Steve is watching.
Hi everyone, we are the hosts of Like Mother, Like Murder, a true crime momcast.
You heard that right. We are a mom cast, which is our unique twist in the true crime world.
What sets us aside is that our content is mainly mom related, from missing moms to murdered moms,
To moms who committed the crime, survivors, and more.
We are getting started on our 3rd season with over 100 episodes that you guys can go and binge. I am Rachel.
And I'm Heather. We drop new episodes every Tuesday, wherever you get your podcasts, at Like Mother,
Like Murder.